Good morning, good morning. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the service from the Unitarian Society of Northampton and Florence. I'm Janet Bush, and I am the minister of this congregation. If you are new or if you're returning after a time away, we're very glad to see you. Please feel free to fill out a blue welcome card. Somebody can hold one up. Thank you, Catherine. You can put it in the offering plate later in the service, and there's also a link to the online version in the chat. We will then put you on our email list so that you can receive information about everything we do. We strive to be a congregation that welcomes people of all ages, races, religious beliefs, backgrounds, and abilities, gender identities. We belong to the UU Association of Congregations, and we're guided and inspired by its values and principles. Those values and principles move us to remember that those of us in the Pioneer Valley live on the unceded homeland of the Pecumtuck, Nonotuck, and Western Nipmuc peoples. And we acknowledge our responsibility to confront the legacies of dispossession and systemic racism that are part of our collective history. We also affirm and celebrate the many legacies that inspire us. We have drawing materials and other ways to occupy hands on the tables in the back. Restrooms are downstairs and reach through either of those doors. Elevator that way, stairs that way. You can take those stairs and return the same way. Our speaker this morning is Booker Bush, who, among other things, volunteered in the middle school class of our home congregation and has served here as a coming-of-age teacher and mentor. Unitarian Universalist coming-of-age programs offer 8th and 9th graders an opportunity to explore their own beliefs, and those programs culminate in a service where the youth share their thoughts with the congregation. This congregation has a tradition of inviting adults to do this as well. And Booker is going to offer his own credo this morning. You are invited to join others after the service here in the Great Hall to learn about what you can do to advocate for a ceasefire and relief for the suffering in Gaza, to write a postcard, and to take the information about other additional actions home with you. Bill Diamond will be in front. He's over there right now, but he'll come up front to organize things. And now we'll begin our service.
Our opening words are from Martin Luther King. Let us rise up with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move on in these powerful days, these days of challenge to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation.
I invite you now to rise in body or spirit and join in saying the words to accompany lighting our chalice. Immediately after that, we'll sing the hymn, Every Time I Feel the Spirit, which is number 208. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom. I owe Kathy Lilly a big apology. I gave her wrong information about the order of things. So we'll give her a minute to find the story again.
I'm ready.
Mrs. Booker chose this story, and there's a page in it, it belonged to our children, and there's a page in it that someone ripped. And then I recreated the drawing and to fix it. So this is The Missing Piece by Shel Silverstein. It was missing a piece and it was not happy. So it set off in search of its missing piece. And as it rolled, it sang this song, I'm looking for my missing piece, looking for my missing piece. Hi-de-ho, here I go, looking for my missing piece. Sometimes it baked in the sun, and then the cool rain would come down. That's the corrected page. Sometimes it was frozen by the snow, but the sun would come and warm it again. And because it was missing a piece, it couldn't roll very fast, so it would stop to talk to a worm or smell a flower. And sometimes a beetle would pass it. And sometimes it would pass a beetle. And this was the best time of all. And on it went over oceans. I'm looking for my missing piece. Land and seas, grease my knees and fleece my bees. I'm looking for my missing piece. Through swamps and jungles, up mountains, down mountains, until one day, lo and behold, I found my missing piece. It sang, I found my missing piece, grease my knees and fleece my bees. I found. Wait a minute, said the piece. Before you go greasing your knees and fleecing your bees, I am not your missing piece. I'm nobody's piece. I'm my own piece. And even if I was somebody's missing piece, I don't think I'd be yours. Oh, it said sadly, I'm sorry to have bothered you. And on it rolled. it found another piece, but this one was too small. And this one was too big, and this one was a little too sharp. And this one was too square. And one time it seemed to have found the perfect piece, but it didn't hold it tightly enough and lost it. Another time it held on too tightly and it broke. So on and on it rolled, having adventures, falling into holes, bumping into stone walls. And then one day, it came upon another piece that seemed to be just right. "Hi," it said. "Hi," said the piece. "Are you anybody else's missing piece?" "Not that I know of." "Well, maybe you want to be your own piece." "I can be someone's and still be my own." "Well, maybe you don't want to be mine." "Maybe I do." "Maybe we won't fit." Well, it fit perfectly at last. And away it rolled. And because it was now complete, it rolled faster and faster, faster than it had ever rolled before. So fast that it could not stop to talk to a worm or smell a flower. Too fast for a butterfly to land. But it could sing its happy song. At last it could sing, "I've found my missing piece." And it began to sing, "I've found my missing piece, I found my missing piece, so grish my ears, oh my. Now that it was complete, it could not sing at all. "Aha," it thought. "So that's how it is." So it stopped rolling, and it set the piece down gently and slowly rolled away. And as it rolled, it softly sang, "I'm looking for my missing piece. Hidey-ho, here I go, looking for my missing piece." The end. It's a great story. And now it's time for everyone to greet one another. You can stand up and say hello to everyone on Zoom to start, and then turn and greet your neighbor. Hello, everyone on Zoom. It's great to see you this morning. Hi, Laura. Good to see you. Christine and John. Who else is there? Oh, Booker's taking the thing. Evelyn and Gil, good to see you. Where's everybody else? Hi, Kent. Hi, Guile. Jen Beeler, hello. Kathy and Teresa, nice to see you. Booker says hi. Hi, Sally. Hey, Fran. Hey, Chris, nice to see you. Rick, Nick, Kamala. Wonderful to see you all. Who did I miss? Anybody? Cannot move video. Okay, leave me alone. That might be everyone. I can't see the rest of the screen, but I'm glad to see you all. Here, I have one more trick. Whoops. I hope you all get out in the sunshine this morning, this afternoon. And now it's time for everyone who is going to religious education activities to leave us, and we will sing you out. Go now in peace, go now in peace. Lead us where our lives
The reading is from Harvey Cox. Cox wrote this essay I'm about to read to you for a republication of The Secular City. This article appeared in 1990. It was 25 years after he wrote the book, The Secular City. You'll see why I'm choosing to read from Cox when the sermon happens. I wrote The Secular City after having lived for a year in Berlin, where I taught in a church-sponsored adult education program with branches on both sides of the barbed wire. The wall was constructed a few months before I arrived, so I had to commute back and forth through Checkpoint Charlie, whose familiar wooden shack and warning sign, "You are leaving the American sector," have now been placed in a museum. Berlin had been the home of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and many of his friends and coworkers were still there, so we talked a lot about Bonhoeffer that year, especially about the musings he set down during the last months of his life about the hiddenness of God and the coming of a post-religious age in human history. In the tense and tired Berlin of the early 1960s, that made a lot of sense. In retrospect, of course, it's easy to see that human religiosity is a much more persistent quality than Bonhoeffer thought it was. Nearly everywhere we look in the world today, we witness an unanticipated resurgence of traditional religion. The renaissance of Islamic culture and politics, the rebirth of Shinto in Japan, the appearance of powerful Jewish, Hindu, and Christian fundamentalisms in Israel, India, and the US. All these have raised important questions about the allegedly ineluctable process of secularization. Well, where does that leave us? If anything, I believe these developments make the central thesis of the secular city even more credible. I argued then that secularization, if it is not permitted to calcify into an ideology which I call secularism, is not everywhere and always an evil. It prevents powerful religions from acting on their theocratic pretensions. It allows people to choose among a wider range of worldviews. Today, in parallel fashion, it seems obvious that the resurgence of religion in the world is not everywhere and always a good thing. Do the long-suffering people of Iran believe that after the removal of their ruthless Shah, the installation of a quasi-theocratic Islamic republic has turned out to be a wholly positive mood? Do those Israelis and Palestinians who yearn for a peaceful settlement of the West Bank bloodletting believe that either the Jewish or the Muslim religious parties are helping? By the way, this is 1990. How do the citizens of Beirut and Belfast feel about the continuing vitality of religion? The truth is that both religious revival and secularization are morally ambiguous processes. Both heal and destroy. We still desperately need a way of welcoming diversity that does not deteriorate into nihilism, and a sober recognition that neither religious nor secular movements are good or bad as such. Both can become either the bearers of emancipation or the avatars of misery, or some of each. Wouldn't a modest sprinkling of secularization, a de-religionizing of the issues, come as a welcome relief in Ulster and help resolve the murderous tensions in Kashmir and the Gaza Strip? I think next is a social justice minute.
Well, that's a hard one to follow. Thank you, Booker. I'm Susie McCrae, and this is the Social Justice Minute. I'm a member of the USNF the vote. Over the last 8 years, I have been transformed. In March 2016, I downhill skied for the last time. I celebrated my birthday with my parents, and I believed in our political process. Now, 8 years later, I have 2 artificial hips. I no longer have parents. I am a grandmother, and I am very scared about what is happening to our democracy. However, I have learned not to be paralyzed by fear, anger, and outrage, but to take action. Action makes me hopeful. At USNF The Vote, we are in collaboration with 2 amazing organizations, Center for Common Ground and Movement Voter Project. A portion of our Share the Plate today and this quarter is going to Center for Common Ground, a Black, woman-led voting rights organization. They sponsor the postcard campaign that we have worked on for the last 4 years. We are currently writing 1,800 postcards to Georgia voters, and in April, we will begin on Virginia. Our financial support today and going forward helps them keep providing us with concrete actions and to do the important work they do on the ground. We are collaborating with Movement Voter Project. Through MVP, I have come to understand the importance of grassroots organizing and the power of personal connections. I am not able to knock on doors in swing states, but I am able to mobilize people in my community, both here and virtually. We need to encourage everyone we know to do something now to defend the freedoms and liberties we currently enjoy. I would like to ask each of you to join me in being a co-host at our upcoming MVP Community Party, which will be on Zoom on April 24th. And we hope you will join us this afternoon for a concert to benefit MVP with Fiery Hope and Annie Patterson, which is here at 3 p.m. Please see me after the service for handouts on what you can do and postcards. Thank you for doing this work with me.
My name is Steve Kramer, and I'm speaking on behalf of the nominating committee. Each year, the nominating committee is tasked with the responsibility of finding members of the society to fill the elected positions that are critical to the functioning of our community. These include the officers and members of the board, the coordinating council, and the nominating committee itself. I am asking each of you to consider taking on one of these roles. Before being elected to the nominating committee, I was a co-moderator for the coordinating council. I was a bit surprised to be asked because I had only been a member of the society for a couple of years, and frankly, I had little idea what the coordinating council even did. It reminded me a bit of when I learned to swim. My mother had taken me to swimming school with the old-fashioned sink or swim philosophy, literally. I was thrown into the deep end and I sank. My instructor had to pull me up with a fishing net. To my mother's credit, I never returned to that particular swim school. And while there were times that I felt a bit out of my depth on coordinating council, it turned out that there were plenty of people with nets to help pull me up. So don't be afraid to serve, even if you are new here. Teresa and I joined the USNF shortly after we moved to Amherst from the Boston suburbs. We joined because we felt that we had found a community that shared our values and put those values into action. Being on council deepened my connection to that community, and it gave me a deeper sense of belonging. It also allowed me to become friends with people I might not otherwise have. So if you are asked to be nominated for a position, please consider it seriously. You will get back at least as much as you give. And even without being asked, consider nominating yourself by talking to me or any other member of the nominating committee, or sending an email to nomcom@uunorthampton.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Susie. Every week we take an offering to support the work of this society and the work of organizations outside the community that have been chosen, nominated by people in the congregation and selected by that coordinating council that Steve spoke about. Our generosity makes a huge difference, and our morning offering will now be given and very gratefully received. This morning's meditation was written by a UU minister named Lisa Friedman. Spirit of life and love, why is there something rather than nothing? Why do wishes sometimes come true when spoken beneath the stars? Why, after millions of years of life on this earth, does death still sting? Why is it so hard for people to learn how to love one another? Questions rise up within our souls, born of fear and delight, sorrow and confusion. Questions live within us, shaping our choices and shaping our search for truth. Help us to embrace our questions and help us to continue to grow. Take some time together in silence, and then we'll sing hymn number 1045, Balm in Gilead.
I'm going to read you a poem written by Dudley Randall. The name of the poem is Booker T and W.E.B. WEB, of course, refers to W.E.B. Du Bois. I want you to take note of the bias in this poem. Again, the name of the poem is Booker T and W.E.B. It seems to me, said Booker T, it shows a mighty lot of cheek to study chemistry and Greek when Mr. Charlie needs a hand to hoe the cotton on his land. And when Miss Ann looks for a cook, why stick your nose inside a book? I don't agree, said W.E.B. If I should have the drive to seek knowledge of chemistry or Greek, I'll do it. Charles and Miss can look another place for hand or cook. Some men rejoice in skill of hand and some in cultivating land, but there are others who maintain the right to cultivate the brain. It seems to me, said Booker T, that all you folks have missed the boat who shout about the right to vote and spend vain days and sleepless nights in uproar over civil rights. Just keep your mouths shut. Do not grouse, but work and save and buy a house. I don't agree, said W.E.B., for what can property avail if dignity and justice fail? Unless you help to make the laws, they'll steal your house with trumped up claws. A rope's as tight, a fire is hot, no matter how much cash you've got. Speak soft and try your little plan, but as for me, I'll be a man. Seems to me, said Booker T, I don't agree, said W.E.B. Our next hymn is hymn number 95, There Is More Love Somewhere. Lord. When I said yes to speaking today, it was a long time ago. I thought it was going to be an opportunity to reflect on how things have changed since I became a doctor in 1983. Well, a few things changed since when I said yes, I would do this. The minister announced her retirement. 3 weeks ago, I informed people at Bay State that I was also wanted to retire, and I am on July 1st. So with your permission, the person who used to help our youth do Credo statements, I'm going to do that now. I'm going to follow all the rules. I'm wearing a collared shirt. It's based on choose a few stories and try to take off from those stories. So I'm going to do those things. And by the way, I noticed that the person who helped me co-teach Coming of Age here, Jen Beeler, is actually on Zoom. And that means a lot to me. In the early 90s, Janet and I were invited to a remarkable dinner at Harvard to celebrate a new professorship in the African American Studies Department. All the Black members of the Harvard faculty were invited. More than 100 people were present. The event was hosted by the heads of the department, Skip Gates and Cornel West. They went from table to table introducing themselves. And then when I introduced myself as Booker T. Bush, Skip Gates, who was the W.E.B. Du Bois Professor of the Department of African American Studies, leaned over backwards and said, Booker T. Washington is not held in high esteem in these parts. Sometimes you don't choose your ancestors. Sometimes you are given your ancestors, and Booker T. is one of mine. As a kid, I liked my name. People liked the sound of Booker T. It was easy to remember. As a third grader, I read Up From Slavery, where Booker T. Washington described his own metamorphosis from slave to educated man to creator of institutions of learning and curricula that would influence education for Negroes in the South. Negroes would rise through hard work and would need to work harder than whites to succeed. He was likely the most important Black intellectual, I'm going to say now Black conservative intellectual, from 1880 through 1910. My father went to Tuskegee, where he learned a trade. After graduation, he became a building contractor and moved to Berkeley. He wasn't called Booker T, though. His company was B.T. Bush General Contracting. He went by B.T. I learned later that he was B.T., so people didn't know he was colored until they met. He had been taught that he would have to work harder to succeed, and so would his children. I had to learn a lot later. W.E.B. Du Bois was the other intellectual at the turn of the century, local kid born in Great Barrington. Very different world from Booker T. Washington's. Unlike Washington's upbringing in slavery and then communities that only included Negroes, W.E.B. Du Bois lived in mixed communities. He went to public schools with white students. He went to Fisk University, a historically Black college in Nashville, Tennessee. While there, he received a more direct lived experience of racism. This was his first time living in the South, and he began his college education while 300 miles to his south, Booker T. Washington became the leader of Tuskegee Normal and Industrial. After graduation from Fisk, Du Bois studied and was the first Negro to receive a doctorate from Harvard in what we would now call sociology. I'm going to quickly mention here that his research in public health was the beginning of what we would now call healthcare disparity research. But at the moment, though, I'm playing him off against my other ancestor. In 1895, Washington spoke at the Atlanta Exposition. That was, in those days, what the World's Fair was. In the speech, and after he gave the speech, it is now called the Atlanta Compromise. In the speech, he advocated a go-slow approach to racial improvement, concentrate energy on industrial education and accumulation of wealth, and the conciliation of the South. This speech made Booker T. Washington extraordinarily popular in the white government power structure. He was a friend of presidents. They liked his way, his approach. He was a champion of the white power structure because his approach to the betterment of blacks was through education and the learning of trades and developing independence. Integration wasn't a goal. Separate was fine if equal resources were offered by the government and banks. Separate but equal. Somehow I missed that when I read Up From Slavery as a third grader. When the speech was first offered, everybody was a fan. W.E.B. was a fan. However, a few years later, W.E.B. instead championed equality and integration. Quote, a talented tenth of the race would rise through learning and creativity and deliver true equality for the races. This was the philosophy of the educated Negroes in the North who also had more access to public education and other institutions. These were the competing messages that were being debated at the beginning of the 20th century. When I was young, I didn't know about W.E.B. Du Bois, but I feel like I was expected to be part of that talented tenth of the race. I grew up in California. And although I knew I was colored, by the way, if you're not paying attention, I'm going to use the terms that were being used at different terms. And it's very interesting. Microsoft Word doesn't believe that you should be able to say the word Negro. It keeps trying to take that out of the text. I grew up in California, and although I knew I was colored, I didn't feel like I was actively discriminated against. I went to Catholic schools, and the classes were 90% white. However, each year, the classes became majority colored. The white students kept disappearing every year. I learned a lot later. I grew up Catholic, the whole package. Catholic elementary, Catholic high school. Bible written by God, Holy Trinity real, Credo in Latin, altar boy, Latin Mass. I was groomed to go to a Catholic college or perhaps even the seminary to learn to be a priest. If not for a course I took in senior year. I don't remember the name of the course. There were only 10 students in the class. It had a lay teacher. His name's Tom Brady. He recently died. The reading list. Prometheus bound by Aeschylus. Those of you who don't know it. Prometheus was punished by Zeus for giving man fire, and the play is his request to understand why he was being published. By the way, when you go to medical school, you'll learn this. The way he was punished was there was a vulture who would come every day and eat his liver. And livers regenerate themselves. So the liver would regenerate, and so then the next day the vulture could come back and eat his liver again. Great torture. So he wanted to know, why was he being punished by Zeus? And it was his hubris that led to this. The next book we read was The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, which has at its center some arguments about whether God existed or not. It's Catholic high school. Ivan would ask his brother Dmitri how God could exist and allow the suffering of children and people. Dmitri would counter with discussions about, well, there's beauty and creativity and justice, and that's why there's God. And then the third book was this book, The Secular City by Harvey Cox, which described the rise of humanism, the decline in hierarchical systems, and described the possible death of God. Off script. When Janet's mom retired from the Wellesley College faculty, I was at the party, and I'm talking with this person, and he introduced himself, says, hi, I'm Harvey Cox. And it was like my Taylor Swift. I said, your book changed my life. And he just sort of, enough. I still thought the Bible was written by God. When you live within the walls of a Catholic school and you're taught by nuns and Christian brothers, what Tom Brady introduced us to was radical stuff. It had its effect on me. I learned to love reading books about ideas. I stopped going to Catholic church. Now, I'm going to skip college. Suffice it to say that Yale was important, that I fell in love with New England. I learned to sing in choral groups. We actually sang at Smith in 72. I learned to sing in choral groups, and I met her. Enough about college. Now, this allows me to move to second story. Medical school was the only time in my school life that I sat at a black table during lunch. It was difficult. There was a small cohort of black students ahead of my class, and all of them had failed part 1 of the medical board exams. The next group of black students brought an attitude of never again. So when you sat at the black table, the older students would spend the time grilling us on coursework and how to get over succeeding on the wards. You had to study and cram to eat lunch. The teaching, always be early, always be more prepared and more competitive than the other, meaning white students in the class and on the wards. In retrospect, it was like Booker T. Washington was at the table. I completely internalized everything I learned at that table. I always had to know more than everyone else in whatever room I was sitting in. It worked really well for me in my medical training and early career. Only black medical intern at Yale, first 4 or 5 years when I was in Boston, a rare black member of the Faculty of Medicine. By the way, and now I am going to do a little bit how medicine has changed. When I was in training at Yale from 1978 until 81, there was this new, really fascinating disease, and it was just getting figured out, and it was called Lyme disease, because most of the cases were centered around Old Lyme, Connecticut, and when you walked into the coronary care unit, it was all young people with all these heart problems due from Lyme disease. It was a really exciting time. So that doesn't turn all of you on. I'm surprised. When I became a faculty physician in Boston, there was another new infectious disease. So I'm going to change the focus a little bit. In 1986, I'm running the physical diagnosis course for Harvard medical students, how to learn how to examine and talk to patients. For the first session, I had 30 students observe while I evaluated Patrick. Patrick was a young Irish Catholic homosexual man with a difficult, usually lethal infection called AIDS. Treatment that was efficacious was 10 years away. We didn't know how to treat AIDS until 1996. The patient had a lot that would be really interesting. For a medical student at the time, he was jaundiced because of liver disease from something called non-A, non-B hepatitis. 5 years later, it was called hepatitis C. Now it's curable. Not then. He was articulate, he was open, he was talkative. He enjoyed being the center of attention of the people in the room. At one point in the interview, while I was talking with him in front of these 30 students, he looked at me and said, "As you know, I've got this infection that's going to probably kill me. I'll probably become a part of this quilt that's going around the country. I don't want to die looking like a mess. I want to speak with you about whether you would give me medications so I could comfortably die when I choose." 1986. Well, that was a surprise. By the way, this happened in front of 30 first-year medical students. I looked at the students and they were aghast. I told my patient that I would promise to speak with them later without the student audience. We left the patient with a thanks. 30 minutes later, in the spirit of new case-based curricula, I asked the students, "What would you advise me do when I speak with the patient later today about his request for medications to speed his death?" There was nothing but silence. So I said again, what should I do? This is real. This isn't theoretical. And one of them finally said, that's an ethical question. Good. What would ethics advise me here? Long pause. Different students said, ethics is what we do on Wednesdays from 1 until 2. Patrick died a few months later at the hospice of Mission Hill. The hospice was a pretty marvelous place. It was designed by architects to be friendly, interesting, and it was especially for gay men who were dying of AIDS. Surrounded by this community and beautiful surroundings, Patrick was no longer interested in medications to speed his death. I learned a lot from that experience, and I chose to learn more about end-of-life care. And by the way, if you were a primary care doctor taking care of AIDS patients up until 1996, all you were doing was end-of-life care. His funeral mass was in a Boston Catholic church. And like a lot of my events I attended at the time, I was angry. I'm not going to use the word I thought I was going to say. I was very angry at what I experienced. There was contempt for his sexuality. There was no family at his services. Parents were ashamed and angry about the choices their sons had made. I've got to say, I was also really influenced by how isolated all of these young men were. They were abandoned by their families. They were abandoned by community. There was a lot of loneliness. There was a lot of pain. I've got to say, as I felt all of that, I said, I need to have children. I don't want to be isolated like that. So then Daniel and Elliot happened. You have children, and perhaps you regress to what you did when you grew up. Janet and I thought it might be useful for our kids to have a religious education. And the Unitarian Universalist Society in Wellesley had Barney Frank giving sermons. We thought that might work for us, and it did. At UUSWH, John Nichols was the minister there. He later became an interim, I know, here. There wasn't much Jesus. There was not much creed. A lot about spirit, caring for others, principles rather than thou shalt nots, and the community helped to fend off loneliness and isolation. We went for the kids, but jumped in for ourselves. I know this sounds like one of those things that the stewardship campaign does. Living the principles, especially the first about inherent worth and dignity, became a touchstone for me. My medical research and teaching was on people with addictions, people with chronic pain, people who were at the end of life. My boss said it seemed I liked to teach about the things that made doctors really uncomfortable. People who deserved care because they had inherent worth. I felt I was doing really good work. Then in the mid-90s, a Wellesley College faculty professor named Peg McIntosh, wait to see how many of you know who she is. Next line. She gave a session at the Unitarian Society called The Invisible Knapsack and White Privilege. I was completely unsettled by what she taught us. And 25 years later, we would have said I was experiencing white fragility, and I was. Like her, I had grown up, and I'm going to quote her now, I was taught to see racism only in individual acts of meanness, not in invisible systems conferring dominance on my group. What I learned was unsettling, and not as a person who had experienced racism, which I had, but more so, I learned how I had become complicit in institutional racism. I had entered some of the bastions of privilege and power, and I was complicit. I participated in test writing that explicitly tried to prevent certain kinds of medical graduates to succeed. I participated in admission committees that favored certain groups. I was complicit in systems that resisted allowing physicians with disabilities to become staff physicians. There were probably more, but I'm still aware of some, and I'm still learning about others as I continue to grow. I needed to learn that my whole style of being, having to know more than everyone else in the room, was a result of trying to do battle with privilege. It was and is not a happy way of being, and led to more antagonism and difficult relationships than what was needed. It affected my work relationships and my relationships with my children. Systemic racism and privilege works in a variety of ways. I have a text here saying, now take a deep breath. "15 to 16 years ago, Janet and I moved here for her ministry. It was big changes for her. For me, I'm not teaching at Harvard anymore. I don't take care of people in the hospital, only in the clinic. I stopped working 80 hours a week and switched to 40. It's actually supposed to be 60%, but it turns out to be 40. I didn't work at all for the first 6 months when I got here, got to know the area, farmers markets, where to walk, where to buy great food. Being here, I can pay more attention to social justice. I can care for people who have suffered real oppression. I can care for people who matter. This community has been wonderful for me, and I've learned to be less competitive, more accepting and understanding. It's hard to know how much changed because of the place or because of an awful lot of psychotherapy that, no, enough about that. Perhaps therapy allowed me to accept and open up what our faith tradition and the Valley had to offer. Coming of age teaching taught me what is important, and what is important continues to change. Every Sunday, I see the world in new ways. The people I get to teach and the patients I have the privilege to care for are no longer the elite, precious, privileged. They're the people with inherent worth, dignity, and spirit. I still have a lot to learn. I'm learning about new heroes, leaders, because what I learned from Booker T, W.E.B., Malcolm X, MLK, Peg McIntosh, and countless others is a part of me, but not enough. Their words and ideas need to continue to evolve because the ways we understand each other need to evolve. My search for meaning will continue. Thank you all for sitting with me for the last 15 years. The last hymn is the favorite hymn of every coming of age class. It's number 120, 1020 in the Teal hymnal. It's called Lean on Me. The only not spiritual in this service, but it is written by a Black composer.
If we are one.
You can tell those are COVID slides. When we didn't have to worry about these things.
Martin Luther King is my Alpha and Omega, so we started with his words and we will end with his words. Whatever your life's work is, do it well. A man should do his job so well that the living, the dead, and the unborn could do it no better.